So that's a very dangerous trend. So I call it a slippery slope. That's what people, even people on the left, they said, we stepped on a dangerous ground, and I don't know how we're going to get out of this.
Welcome to Chicago Jewish Cafe. Today, we have an honor of hosting Professor Andrei Znamenski. He was born in the Soviet Union and spent the last 35 years, well, maybe not the last 35 years, exploring religions, ideologies, and utopias. Formerly a resident scholar at U.S. Library of Congress, and then visiting professor at Hokkaido University in Japan. He is currently professor of history in Memphis University of Memphis. Professor Znamenski's main interest is the study of indigenous religions of Siberia and North America, including Shamanism and Tibetan Buddhism. Hopefully I pronounced it correctly. Intrigued by Western idealization, non-Western cultures, and spiritualities, I'm trying to read a little bit here from introduction to his book. He wrote a book on the topic of the beauty of the primitive, Shamanism and Western Imagination. This year, however, he published a book which turns the attention of his readers to a little bit different direction. He published a book called Socialism as a Secular Creed, which he sees as a logical follow-up in line with his main interest. This book is his attempt to examine the socialist phenomenon as a political religion of the modern age. This very well-written book provides a bird's-eye view of the history of this remarkable, to say the least, 2-century-old phenomenon. Professor Znamenski approaches socialism as a form of modern political religion that arose out of activities of secularized apocalyptic sects, the Enlightenment tradition, and dislocations produced by the Industrial Revolution. He examines how by the 1850s, Marx and Engels made the socialist creed scientific, in quotes, by linking it to history laws that they supposedly discovered, and inventing the proletariat, the chosen people of socialism that were to redeem the world from the oppression. Focusing on the fractions between social democracy and communism, Professor Znamenski explores why historically socialism became associated with social engineering and centralized planning. He explains the rise of the New Left in the 1960s and its role in fostering the cultural left that came to privilege race and identity over class today, exploring the global retreat of the left in the 1980s and 1990s and the great neoliberalism scare, as some people called it. Znamenski also analyzes the subsequent renaissance of socialism in the wake of 2007-2008 economic crisis. You can find this book on Amazon. We have placed the link to it below this video. Professor Znamenski kindly agreed to visit us and talk about the movement for socialism in today's America. I remember the time when this movement shied from calling itself socialist in large forums. Today, however, many of its leading advocates openly declare themselves as such. If I remember correctly, even Newsweek declared at the early stage of Obama's presidency on its cover that now we are all socialists. Andrei, what can you say about socialism in America today?
Thank you, Alexander, for such detailed introduction and for giving this detailed summary of my book. And by the way, you just mentioned an interesting event from our recent history, 2008, when the Newsweek magazine published an issue that sampled on the cover this famous phrase, "We're all socialists now." It's after Barack Obama came to power. So why did they come up with this slogan? It's not an accident, because there were forces in the United States by 2008 that were brewing. They were preparing ground for this rejuvenation of the left movement in the United States. Particularly, socialism was never popular historically, was never popular in the United States, unlike whatever was going on behind the big water in Europe, and especially in Eastern Europe and Eurasia, the place where you and I came from. What happened with the United States in this case? Okay, since 1960s, forces that peddled socialism openly or indirectly became very powerful. So my book actually tells why these forces empower themselves, not only in the United States, but in other countries where they received, so to speak, the second wind. Okay. At the center of my book is the history of this phenomenon for the past 200 years. So I want to explore the roots, because I want to give an idea to my readers where it had come from. Okay. And the second idea of my book is to show how traditional socialism, which you and I know, or Marxist socialism, became transformed in the 1960s, 1970s into something different. And this something different, which I describe by the expression cultural left or identitarian left, or sometimes people on the right describe this phenomenon by using the word cultural Marxism. So that's the new thing. So socialism dramatically changed its face in the 1960s, 1970s. So half of my book examines this process, how it became transformed, and why this second edition of socialism became so popular in the United States and other Western countries. See, the problem is here. Sometimes people who superficially know about socialism, they tell us, come on, how can you say that these people who propagate identity politics, political correctness, cultural issues, cancel culture, how can you say they're socialists? Socialism is about classes. Socialism is about peaceful revolution or violent revolution in communism. So it was in the past century. We do have groups like this to the present day in the including United States, but they're very marginal, by the way, these groups. So how can you talk like this? You know, the problem is that these people don't understand. Socialism changed its face. It's like religion, like Christianity, what we had in the 19th century, in the 18th century, in the 17th century, and what we have right now. It's similar, but at the same time, these are two different phenomena. Same with Islam, same with any other religion, same with socialism. And by the way, my view as a historian is a view of a religious historian. So I want to examine socialism as a political religion. That's the major thesis of my book. Why do I do this? People might ask me. I do it simply because socialism did become a surrogate religion. Socialism is something that gradually emerged within Judeo-Christian culture. Somewhere at the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century. Particularly, it emerged out of a Protestant culture, out of Catholic culture. How and why? In order to unpack the origin of this phenomenon, I have to take you back to the roots of history. So when Protestant Reformation had taken place in the 1500s, among the Protestants, we have a bunch of groups that started to read the Bible like crazy. Okay, they challenged the Roman Pope. They said we shouldn't have one person on the top of religious pyramid. We should have our own mind. We should critically explore church. We have a bunch of groups that started to read the Bible, and they started to compete with each other. Basically, it was the call of Martin Luther and John Calvin to read the Bible and make judgment on your own. The more groups like this we had, the more critical mindset we planted in Judeo-Christian culture. Okay. So to make a long story short, by the beginning of the 1800s, 19th century, we have different Protestant sects that started to question the Bible itself, because they started to argue about the miracles, biblical miracles. They started to argue about particular stories in the Bible. They, Protestant people, they started learning how to read and to write. So Europeans became highly educated. At the same time, Southern Europe also tried to catch up. They tried to fight back against the Protestant advance. Okay, Jesuits started to set up colleges, schools. So Europe became more educated. But what happened? Traditional religion started to go down. That's the fact. At the same time, a lot of people still believed in God, and they wanted to revive the idea of God somehow. So that's how we have so-called Deism, when the great minds of the European world, like Isaac Newton or Denis Diderot, like Voltaire, they said, yes, Mr. God had created the world, but he doesn't interfere in our life. He just like a clock master. He started the world, but now it's up to us by using our reason and mindset to change the world. Okay, see, that's what happened because of this gradual secularization of the European mind. And eventually, through Renaissance, we have Enlightenment, when a bunch of these Protestant groups, they became heavily secularized. And something needed to come to replace the idea of God, because people need to believe into something. So people cannot live without some kind of faith. It could be any kind of faith. Again, even if you say you don't believe in anything, you still believe in something. Remember this famous story, dialogue between Bazarov and this aristocrat in the novel of Fathers and Sons by Ivan Turgenev. Remember, this old aristocrat tells Bazarov, who said, I'm a nihilist, I don't believe in anything. I'm a biology scientist, you know. I only believe in science. I only believe in science. There is no God. I don't believe in anything. So this old man challenges him, and he asks him, so you don't believe in anything? Absolutely correct. I don't believe in anything. And you're convinced in this? Yes, I'm convinced in this. How can you say you don't believe in anything? So this nihilist who believed in science and biology, that was his faith. So that's what came gradually to replace traditional religion. And this something became science. So people were so overwhelmed with what was going on in at the end of 1700s, in the beginning of 1800s. And what we have at that time, we have the Industrial Revolution. At first, we had the Scientific Revolution. We have these great inventions. We have the so-called scientific laws. And then on the heels of Scientific Revolution, we have Industrial Revolution, when we have steam engine, railroads, all kinds of inventions. Okay, James Watt, Fulton, steamboats, you know, railroads. I don't want to go into details. So great minds at that time and intellectuals, people with elementary education, they came to conclusion that now the human reason became so powerful that science came to replace religion. And that's what's important for us to remember. So the power of socialism, especially Marxian socialism, because we cannot reduce entire socialist movement to Marxian socialism. But at the same time, Marxian socialism was the major part of socialism. But let's roll back a little bit, the time before Marxian socialism. Just for now, please remember that the power of socialism was that socialism was able to capitalize on this faith in science. Why? Because socialism, from the very beginning, masqueraded as the hard science. the science of society. Anyway, we have a bunch of groups in the beginning of the 1800s, like groups headed by Robert Owen, a British textile manufacturer. I write about him in my book. Or French aristocrat named Andrei Saint-Simon. I also write about him in my book. Marx and Engels, the founders of Marxian socialism, considered those socialists and communists who came before as utopians. Why? A few words about these utopians. Let's take, for example, Robert Owen. Robert Owen created a bunch of groups in England, and these groups set up so-called halls of sciences, halls of science. On Sundays, they met together and they lectured about science and how powerful science was. Sometimes the lectures were so passionate that later they decided to issue books of social gospels. So instead of Bibles, they started to produce small books that were called social gospels. There people were encouraged to sing social gospels, to sing gospels devoted to science, to glorification of science. In the meantime, in France, Andrei Saint-Simon created so-called New Christianity. That's what later he labeled socialism. By the way, Robert Owen was the first to introduce the word socialism, and people who followed Andrei Saint-Simon, who did the same thing in France, they also started to call themselves socialism. So what they said, we need to use science, the most recent accomplishments of science, to organize people. Okay, and they wanted to invent the science of society. Basically, it was a romantic view that something was gone from the life of the people, and we need to rejuvenate the whole society. But at the same time, we cannot go back to old society of medieval times, when they said people lived together, when the peasants lived like children, and feudal lords, they were like fathers to them, or like tribal society. Industrial revolution was viewed by these people as a tragedy, because it did bring some, it turned the whole world upside down. The world of villages, the world of peasants, okay? And like romantic poets, these socialists, they also lamented.
But also the world of feudal lords.
Yeah, the world of feudal lords. But they realized that we could not get back to the old world. What we need to do, Robert Owen and Andrei Saint-Simon said, we need to use the most advanced accomplishments of science to organize society, to make sure that we live equally, we live a good life. The wealth should be distributed. And like in old times, when everybody knew his or her place, when everybody lived by guilds, everybody respected each other. So orderly society should be recreated on the basis of science. That is why Andrei Saint-Simon, this utopian socialist, he came up with this idea of Council of Newton. He said, in charge of society, we should have a big group of scholars and artists who knew the way of the future, when all society would be organized, when people below, people up, everybody should know his or her place, the wealth should be distributed. Robert Owen, in the meantime, argued the same thing. But on top of this, Robert Owen argued that we should show to the world the model life, how it should be lived. So that is why he moved to the United States, in Indiana, on the Wabash River in Indiana. He set up a socialist community called New Harmony in 1825. So he brought together 900 people, and he said, look, we will show the world how the life should be organized. He was a very rich man, Robert Owen. He invested $250,000, a huge amount of money at that time, into this project. And everybody was happy. In fact, to challenge American Declaration of Independence, they adopted their own declaration of moral independence. So they wrote this new declaration, which they also called the new Constitution. Unfortunately, 6 months later, they started to watch that something was going on. People started to complain about each other. One person started telling the other one, oh, you work less than me, I work more, so I need to get more food. His neighbor said, no, 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 I work more. And everybody tried to go to the storage. They had the storage, and to get as much food as possible. Soon they ran out of supplies. Nobody wanted to work, and the entire community started to crumble down, started to fall down. So in disgust, Robert Owen left them and said, oh, you are the wrong people. You are not good people. Although originally he said that if
his idea was good. His idea was great. It's just the people that he had misfortune to bring together, they were no good.
They were no good.
No good.
Although Alexander, it totally contradicted his original idea at the same time. So he kind of shot himself in the foot twice. You know, what you said is absolutely true. But the second thing, he used to argue before he came to the United States to set up the socialist community. He said, if you create good circumstances for people, people would be good. So people should not be responsible for the circumstances they live under. It's the circumstances that should be blamed. If you create a good environment for the people, if you create a good matrix for them, a good system.
And who is in charge? Who is in charge of creating the circumstances?
I will be in charge. That's what.
So
because he knew the way. Remember the Council of Newton. I'm the new Isaac Newton.
So he just needs dummies, you know, that listen to what he says.
See, it always, Alexander, it always goes back to who calls the shots.
Yeah.
Who is going to be the missionary, and who is going to show the way, you know? So anyway, so he dumps these people, whoever remained in this new harmony, goes back to England, and his son remains in Indiana. So he said, you will settle this. His son didn't know what to do. He tried this and that, and eventually what he did, he decided to divide the whole land into private plots, and he sold his land to private to private owners, and that's how the community survived. You know, at least those like 85 people who remained there. You know, so to the present day, we still have a small township there. You know, if you want, you can visit this. You know, it's a historical landmark. Yeah. So anyway, let's go further. So that's called utopian socialism. Okay. And then we have two important people who come to the picture, Friedrich Engels and Karl Marx, 1830s, 1840s, okay? But look, Alexander, socialism, once it emerged within this Judeo-Christian secularized culture, secularized Judeo-Christian culture, it's a segment of this culture. It started to spread around. You mentioned Sweden, it went to Sweden. It planted itself in Sweden. It planted itself in Catholic Spain. It planted itself in Eastern Europe. And then from Eastern Europe, it came to Russia. From Russia, later, it came to China. So if you want to bring up my book again. So my book about how these different versions of socialism emerged and spread all over the world. Again, I said the big mistake of all people who approach socialism, they try to reduce everything to Marxian socialism. But don't get me wrong, Marxian socialism is the most powerful element of socialism. But at the same time, we have different versions of socialism. For example, in the 19th century, there were two most popular trends in socialism. It was anarchist socialism and Marxian socialism. At the same time, by the end of the 19th century, we have Fabians coming to the picture. Fabians, who didn't accept Karl Marx. Okay, of course, we have to explain to people what Karl Marx was all about and his teaching. So we didn't do it yet, we will do it. So Fabians came to the picture. Then after 1917, after Bolsheviks took over power, we have this Russian communism. And then after 1949, we have Chinese communism. We have so-called, quote unquote, Swedish socialism, reformed socialism. See, that is why I try to compare socialism, this political religion, with Christianity, because Christianity also emerged in Europe and started to spread all over the world.
But in the United States, roots of socialism are also old. In the beginning of 20th century, there was 10% of the vote went to socialists or something like this. You know, what is it, Party of Debs? Or
Yeah, there was Eugene Debs, there was Socialist Party at the turn of the 1900s. And in fact, there were presidential elections and they took 2 million votes.
Germany.
Okay.
And then later on during the 30s, they also, the demand for socialism, was rising, especially when they were looking at Soviet Union with through the colored glasses. That was great. And some others were looking at fascist Italy. It was great. And for a period of time, people were looking at Nazi Germany saying it was great because it was all socialism, the active interference of the state into every little detail of social life within the society.
Yeah. You mentioned National Socialism. And again, some people have a problem with this, especially people in 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, when the West and the Stalin dictatorship were fighting against Hitler and National Socialism. So the winners write history. And the point was at that time to put under the rug, to sweep under the rug this socialist elements in Hitler's dictatorship, because the left, the internationalist left, felt very uncomfortable when they noticed that Hitler was doing this socialist reforms. Okay, so that's another segment of socialism, National Socialism. It's, by the way, the second element of my book, which I try to argue, is that socialism in the last century and in the present day, it's not only international socialism. We have a bunch of versions of so-called national socialism.
In fact, international socialism is just really tiny element of this.
Absolutely. Phenomenon. Absolutely. And even I go further, Alexander, I go further. I argue that as soon as international socialism was planted in national ground, it became national socialism, or gradually it was turned into national socialism. We have our former motherland, Soviet Union, as an example of this phenomenon. When Lenin and Trotsky, they had planted so-called international socialism when they were dreaming about the world revolution, that people of all countries unite, workers of all countries have no fatherland, no motherland. But then, as soon as they planted this idea in the national soil of former Russian Empire, in 10, 15 years, this international socialism started to acquire indigenous nationalist features, and so-called cosmopolitans were literally wiped out, phased out. People like Trotsky, people like Bukharin, they were wiped out because they could not match this indigenization of socialism. And who remained?
Socialism in one country, Or
socialism, exactly. I'm glad that you brought it up, because the very idea of socialism in one country was already a step in this direction. Okay.
And in your book, it says national Bolshevism. Of course, very, very appropriate. I mean, although there was national Bolshevik movement started abroad outside of the Soviet Union in 20s, calling Stalinist period as a national Bolshevik socialism, I think is very appropriate. And in your book, you hit it right at the target.
And look what happened. When we have an interesting phenomenon, when Stalin, who started this socialism in one country project, he was moving further and further from international socialism to national socialism. On the other hand, we have Hitler, who started as a nationalist.
Very, very, very good.
Moving towards socialism, or assimilating people who were socialists, because we have a very important segment of socialists with the National Socialist Party. So he wanted to placate these people too. So these two trends were moving toward each other.
Okay. He was finding, building bridges to all kinds of nationalist fascists all over the world. It did not. Arabs, Semites, anti-Semitism was the essential element of Nazi ideology, but no problems, of working with the Arab Semites, with the Arab fascists.
Yeah, you're right. It's we know about this when National Socialism of Germany established relationships with Arab nationalists, but I wanted to tell you something more important that exposes this philosophical roots of socialism. Again, even though I mentioned the word expose, It's basically not exposure, but description of what was going on the ground. Okay, look, I have to take you back to the time of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, who established this powerful idea of so-called scientific socialism. Okay, so let me interrupt you again, then we will go back to National Socialist Germany and the Soviet Union. So when Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels come to the picture, 1830s, 1840s, they said, hey, you guys who came before us, you were utopians. Why? Because you didn't show the way to the future. So how you should conquer the power. And that is why Marx and Engels, they came up with this book, the Communist Manifesto. They call the new teaching scientific socialism. See, the word science is very important here. We actually invented the science of society because the old socialists, they simply were utopians. They said, oh, it's nice to have this group of enlightened masters who would command, who would do things for us. But you didn't explain the science of the revolution, how to take power. And Marx and Engels and Communist Manifesto and other works, they explained to people, and that's what captivated the minds of millions of people. They said, look, guys, our world develops according to natural laws. See, the idea of natural laws was very powerful at that time. So the society develops by stages. At first, we lived under primitive communism, but then, because of the laws of history, we were doomed to exploit each other. Okay? We had to go through several oppressive stages, because without these this unavoidable evil, society globally was not able to create material wealth in order to take itself to the bright future. So they said, when we moved from primitive communism to slavery, then to feudalism, then to capitalism, it was natural evolution of society, unavoidable evil. Okay, but then at a certain stage in our society called capitalism, so many contradictions come to clash with each other that we have because of laws of history. We have a class of people that grows up naturally because of laws of history. See, everything is science. That's what attracted intellectuals, contemporary intellectuals.
But it's interesting, you know, it was always of great interest to me, you know. So actually the nature, these laws of history
nature
point to the future that is shining, that is beautiful, that is everything. That is nature where strong, you know, dominates the weak, somehow ends up leading the humanity to a beautiful tomorrow. How's that?
What exactly? Good question. Natural question. They replaced the idea of God with the idea of nature and natural laws. Okay. So there's a certain kind of theological view when Marx and Engels viewed society as in a Judeo-Christian way. So at first there was paradise, this primitive communism, tribal paradise. Remember, Friedrich Engels wrote this famous book called The Origin of Family, Private Property and the State, 1883, where he glorified this tribal communism. He said, oh, it was a wonderful society. But then there was a fall. This human society had to enter oppressive stage, unavoidable evil. So humankind fell in order to rise up again at the last stage of capitalism, when we have class of people, and this class of people, industrial workers, because of the laws of nature.
So basically, Judeo-Christian narrative remained the same. It just was filled with different details.
Secularized Judeo-Christian narrative, They feel, basically, we can say, they feel they put kind of the new wine in old bottles, you know?
Right. Andrei, I would like to actually talk a little bit about today, because actually I'm very, very concerned, especially about the United States, because there's two things that come to my mind that make me concerned. One is multicultural nature of the American society. We know that the things that took place in 20th century Europe was the main thing was the collapse of multicultural empires and replacement of these empires with the monoethnic or approximately monoethnic nation states. Now, it was done through two horrible wars. And when I look at the United States, what bothers me is the possibility that the United States will go through another bloody civil war. Because I do not, when I look at it, I do not see, on one hand, you have a segment of society led by American blacks that want more power, more respect, more presence in this society. On the other hand, I see whites, some of who also want it, but they're losing power. It used to be 68% or more of America was white Protestant. Now it's less than 50%.
See, it's not, you are kind of, I understand what you're talking about, but see, we have to identify the major problem, okay? So it's not about the major mistake we make, the people on the left and on the right. We are currently trapped in this racialized discourse, we have to get out of this discourse, it's a very dangerous path, because of this present day debate try to lock us up, okay? There is
you mean the seeing society?
Yes, we can see what you just said with like 60%, 30%, 40%. I'm against racializing our debates right now. That's what so-called people who promote identity politics, they try to force us into this discourse. I'm against this. I don't want to play by these rules. We need to get out of this paradigm. Why? Because if we trap ourselves in this ideological multiculturalism, we will never get out. Okay, so let me tell you what I mean. If we are going to calculate, who has power, this ethnic group or racial group has more power, this has less power, so we are doomed to constantly compete with each other. Okay, we don't want to go this way, and I'm not a prophet, so we might end up by fighting each other within the United States or within Western countries, but I'm optimist. I hope not. So what I'm concerned about that we are neglecting the simple truth. The
Andrei, I'm with you. I'm with you all the way. I do not want to view society as simply a bunch of different segments which identify themselves, through a particular inborn features. That's not what I'm talking about. But I see that this is going that way.
Yeah,
I see people marching. I see people looting on the street. I see whites reacting a particular way to what blacks are doing. I see blacks are doing reacting particular ways to what whites are doing. And what I see also that the most dynamic element of this movement, which is focused on Black Lives Matter, they openly declare themselves to be Marxists. In the beginning, I thought it was just some kind of a mistake, some...
No, it's not a mistake.
But they openly declare themselves to be Marxists.
Yeah, it naturally, again, it goes back to 1960s, 1970s. And again, I have to draw the link between what I said about Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels and about what's going on right now, what you just mentioned. So these people who declare themselves the BLM or some segments of Black Power, not necessarily. So we have other people. They said we are trained Marxism, or some of them say that we are not Marxists, but we borrowed something from Marxism. So what do we need to talk about? See, the problem is that on the left, who is going to be the savior of the world from oppression? See, that's what they debate. If you put yourself in the shoes of the left, especially mainstream left right now, so the major issues, who is going to
mainstream? You mean Bernie Sanders, Ilhan Omar? I mean,
no, cultural left. Cultural left. It's
cultural left.
Cultural left. Who are obsessed?
Who's that?
Who are obsessed with identity politics? Okay.
So you're talking about BLM. You consider them to be cultural left?
It's a cultural left, yeah. It's a
But
cultural.
Bernie Sanders, you don't consider to be cultural.
He started as a traditional socialist, but he also drifted in this direction. Okay, because he had to side with the mainstream cultural left in order to maintain his popularity in the eyes of the people. Okay, so he kind of belongs to both, you know.
Okay.
So anyway, the old left, they were fixated on a class. Okay, so there's a group of industrial workers who were exploited by society, and these redeemers, working class people or proletariat. Remember, I mentioned Marx and Engels. At some point in history, according to history laws, they had to revolt. They destroy the old society, oppressive society, and they become these enlightened masters headed by the Communist Party, and they lead us to the bright future. Okay. But then in 1960s, 1970s, we see a simple truth that this working class was gone. It didn't want to go to barricades. They started to live a good life. They started having 2 or 3 cars. They started making good salaries. So what's going on? There was a cognitive dissonance in their minds on the left. There was a crisis. Plus, we have Khrushchev coming to the picture in 1956 and denouncing Stalin. So there was a big crisis. So there was a lot of soul searching on the left. And the problem was, the question was, who was going to be our savior? Who was going to be the revolutionary class? Who are going to be these noble savages, quote unquote, who are going to save us from oppression? And that's how they started to debate. The new left, 1960s, 1970s, emerged, came to the picture, and there were some suggestions. There was a very popular guy, a sociologist, American sociologist. His name is Wright Mills. He said, forget, workers betrayed us, no good. You know, Karl Marx and Engels, they were wrong. Okay. Intellectuals, these are the only people who are going to save us. Students, intellectuals, let's get rid of this Victorian Marxism. This guy comes from Texas. He was a Texan, strange as it may sound, Wright Mills. He comes to England and produced a big splash by publishing a letter to the new left, where he said, get rid of Victorian Marxism. Intellectuals are going to save the world. And plus, there was a marginal Italian Marxist named Antonio Gramsci, who argued the same thing in 1930s. But nobody listened to them at that time. But now he turned out to be very relevant. So they excavated his writings from obscurity. Plus, we had so-called Frankfurt School. It's a bunch of Marxists who in 1923, they started the Institute of Social Studies, where they also asked the question, why in Germany workers didn't take power? So what was wrong? And plus, why German workers didn't support communist socialists? Why Hitler came to power? It means workers did not fulfill their historical role, because according to history laws, they had to fulfill their role. So who is going to replace workers? Okay. So eventually in 1960s, 1970s, many people on the left, they were looking where? To the east. They saw that in China, 1949, 1 billion people were headed by the Communist Party, and they had peasant communists. And Chairman Mao Zedong, the head of Chinese communists, he said, villagers, the third world was ruling, calling the shots. And then we have Tanzania, African socialism. We have Angola, we have Ethiopia, we have Zimbabwe, we have Nicaragua, we have a bunch of other third world countries, Indonesia, we have India.
Cuba.
How could we forget Cuba? I wish I had more time to devote more pages in my book to Latin America. You know, that's the only drawback of my book. I didn't have enough room to write about Latin America. Of course, Cuba. So in the meantime, they watched. There was nothing was going on in Western Europe. Nobody wanted to go to barricades. So naturally, they started to drift to the third world. And they said, now the third world is going to save the world. Okay. So the new noble savages were brought to the picture. It's who? The third world, or people, quote unquote, of color within US, within other European countries. Okay. And that's how gradually so-called proletarian class was phased out and became replaced by the new revolutionary groups, new noble savages. And that's how we have this romantic fascination with the third world. And that is why, by the way, I became interested in writing this book in the first place, because originally my research concerned what tribal people. I studied Native American Indians. I studied the religions of native Siberians. But then I noticed something when I came to the United States, this glorification, fascination with tribal people, with the third world. Western people literally smear their own Western civilization with dirt, and they glorified non-Western cultures. And I said to myself, there was something about this, you know, there was something about these people. What forces them? What are the reasons for them to hate their own culture? Okay, and that's how it started. And later I came to these conclusions that basically in 1960s, 1970s, people on the left, they dramatically changed the world of mainstream socialism. We are talking about this mainstream, the socialist thought collective, that the idea of proletariat workers was gradually phased out and replaced by this idea of new noble savages that were the third world and so-called oppressed people within Western countries. Okay, they could be homosexuals, women were declared revolutionary class. You know, there were some feminist groups who said, "Oh, Marx and Engels were wrong," within the United States, who said it's not working class who are exploited right now in the United States. It's the women who are exploited in the kitchen. They work in the kitchen, they exploited by males. It's not capitalists who exploit the labor. It's the males who exploit the women. See, it's an old paradigm, but in a new shape, okay? Or like people who glorify the third world people, they said, oh, look, it's not about capitalism exploiting workers. No. It's about the white West, imperialist West, exploiting the third world countries. See how the paradigm changed.
And what do they offer, these new socialists in the United States? What is their vision? What do they want to make this country? How do they want to change?
The change, the social, the call for racial justice, see the gradual transformation of the left toward identitarian issues. It took like several decades, and basically the call is that so-called quote-unquote white people, which I have problem with this because you cannot find.
You mean just simply redistribution of wealth according to the race?
Yeah, according to the race, and that's what is dangerous. And some people among traditional left, by the way, people who are traditional Marxists, they understand how flawed and dangerous it is, because it takes us to the road of racialism. When people are forced to kind of go race against the race, and I read writings by traditional Marxists. Okay, there's a guy, he's Trotskyite, American Trotskyite. His name is David North. He wrote a book called, it was called False Marxism, where he blamed these cultural Marxists, this cultural left. He said they betrayed working class people because they forced us to think in racial terms. They racialized everything, any part of life, whatever, personal life, economic life, political life, everything was racialized, you know. And he asks actual natural questions. He said, how can you say that like Oprah Winfrey or some other rich African-American person, how can you say that she is oppressed if you compare her with some kind of poor guy from Appalachia area, you know, who lives kind of in dirt with no money, you know? So how can you say it? It's a natural question. And it's a fair question. He said, you basically betrayed so-called traditional Marxism. But again, his call in this case, let's go back to traditional Marxism, class against class. So there are some rich people and the poor people. And he fights against racializing Marxism, okay? See, these two groups, they fight each other. But at the same time, to be exact, cultural Marxism or cultural left, these, they are the mainstream right now. And so-called traditional Marxists, they were marginalized, okay? And that is why we see, you know, in newspapers, we see in TV, we see even corporations, that go woke and they racialize everything. So it's the cultural left, they even kind of sleeping in the same bed with so-called capitalists, you know, because when you go this way, you already close your eyes on like class differences, you racialize everything, you know. But at the same time, we go back to what? I hate to say it, we go back to National Socialism, when one group of people was chosen as the scapegoat. I don't want to.
Yeah, but I do not know if that could be possible in the United States, because blacks constitute only 13.5%.
Yes, of course, but at the same time, it might poison our political discourse. You know, that's what is dangerous, and that is why I think the way out of this conundrum is simply to emphasize the precious value of individual values, individual freedom. Okay, and that's what we
neither
need to
traditional left nor the current cultural left cares about individuals.
They don't care.
Care
they
only
don't
about
care.
themselves as individuals. You know, this one, you know, one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter, you know, she actually, you know, I think that they should be investigated for non-payment of taxes, because she has a bunch of houses, you know, she just resigned, very expensive houses, and she was making only $120,000 a year as a salary. Where did she get the money?
I will tell you more. You know, the fundamental mistake of all traditional left who had been marginalized and mainstream left, cultural left, is that they believe there should be some noble people in charge who know the way, you know, and other people should listen to them. And those people who disagree with them, they try to cancel them. And what we have at each time when we try some noble project, we always end up having somebody who takes advantage of the situation. So I'm not going to discuss the case, what you just mentioned. You already mentioned it. I will tell you another story. When Australian homeless person in 2018, he actually set up a website, BLM website from Australia. Nobody knew about it, and swindled people for $500,000 before he was exposed. You know, he made a lot of money.
He put on the a website where he would be
before what happened last year in 2018, it was already done. It had been done. So whatever you said, again, you just said this, you know, it's going on in our American discourse, but I'm telling you something that already happened 3 years ago. But anyway,
Andrei, do you see within American society any segment or situation or what is, because I don't, I mean, this trend toward the fragmentation of the society, I see as more or less permanent. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but do you see any elements within American society that would prevent this fragmentation? I mean, in 1860, it was war that prevented fragmentation. What would it be now?
Strange as it may sound, I'm an optimist in this case. So I believe that America has a certain backbone, and even people on the left, they see the problem. I want to draw attention. Some people might say, oh, what are you talking about? So I want to draw attention to something that happened last year, you know, in the middle of what was going on last summer, in a magazine, a left liberal magazine called Harper's. 100 leftist people, they published a letter, and the letter was signed by J.K. Rowling, a famous person who wrote Harry Potter, Noam Chomsky, a famous leftist, and they outlined the dangerous slippery slope we were going toward. Okay, what was this dangerous slope? They said, we people on the left, we are concerned about so-called cancel culture when certain viewpoints, they're forbidden, not allowed. So it means people on the left already see this trend. So that is why, as I said, of course, there's a lot of room for pessimism, but at the same time, people are not stupid. And I believe they see what is going on, and they would, I wouldn't say shut down, they would, for themselves personally, they're going to cancel these extremes by using the leftist word. See, the problem is you might be surprised what I'm going to mention right now. There's nothing wrong in fragmentation, as long as fragmentation is done voluntarily. If, for instance, you and
I see no problem with fragmentation either.
If you and I want to create some kind of utopian community like Robert Owen and want to do some crazy things without harming other people, right? We're going somewhere, we live and we go broke, we lose money. So, okay, that's okay, it's good. So we are not harming anybody except ourselves,
Yeah, I understand.
The problem,
but what I'm referring to, what I'm talking about, I see now creation of laws.
Yes,
favoring
that's the most
particular race.
See, the problem, exactly, you're right. The problem is that when we have laws that are enforced on us, and the laws, they tell us did this, and that. If you don't do this, you are going to penalize. That's the dangerous trend. So in this case, we have to fight against this. What can I say? Because if some group on the left and on the right, they come up with laws, for example, the laws, they say, oh, you are not allowed to do this and that. It's already, I call it totalitarian slippery slope. Okay.
But you see, like, for example,
very clear.
In Evanston, they passed, that is neighboring suburb, Chicago suburb, they passed a law, that would give millions of dollars to blacks, exclusively blacks, $25,000 per black household from sale of marijuana.
Well, Alexander, look at this. You might be surprised what I'm going to tell you. What is the problem with this? You might not like it, another person might not like it, but if this municipal, I was in Evanston, I lived there for a couple of months in 1991, I know the area, what is this area, but if this municipality wants to do it, and if they want to bankrupt themselves, or if they feel like doing this, that's fine. But what if we have a law that forces everybody to do this across the United States or within the state of Illinois? That will be the problem. Do you understand me?
Well, I think I understand, Andrei.
Alexander, let me interrupt you for a second.
Yes.
But I see a problem with this law. If, for instance, we have a group of legislators, like a municipal authority, that come up, let's say 10 people who are on the board of this municipality, they come up and say, hey, we're going to do this program. As long as people on the ground, we have people on the ground who come up on the referendum and they vote and they say, it's okay with us. So please do it. The same with monuments. For instance, if people in Seattle somewhere come up and they say,
well, are you saying that if it would be a different suburb where whites would decide that only whites would benefit from certain tax revenues, that would be okay?
I don't like it. I don't like it personally. But if they want to do it,
but you say it would be, well, this is
but it's not good. It's not good. But if they want to impose it on us, on you and me, that will be wrong. Let's about monuments.
That was the very foundation of Jim Crow laws in the United States,
which is bad. That is why we need.
But you approve because the so-called the majority within a particular suburb approves it.
No, you begin to ostracize. You begin to ignore these people.
I understand. I don't like it, and I don't like it whether it's on federal, state, or local level. I don't like it because I don't like the very idea that people can pass laws favoring particular race.
Exactly. Totally, 150% agree with you.
But you just said that if they do it democratically, then you're okay with it.
No, you leave this area. Let's say you and I live in this area where people decided to adopt this law. I quit this area. I move away from this area because I will hate this area. I will hate this neighborhood. I'm not going to live in this.
This is one way of reacting, but another way of reacting, and I'm surprised that nobody in Evanston filed a lawsuit because this particular type of thing is violation of 1964
exactly right
civil rights law.
Yes, because we have laws on the books that say that we should not discriminate against particular group of people. And here in Evanston, you have a case of discrimination.
Very much so.
Very much
so. It's not only that. Mayor of Chicago, a black lesbian mayor of Chicago, declares that she's not going to be giving interviews to any non-black or non-colored or whatever it is, however she formulated, to any white reporters.
Absolutely,
She's
outrageous.
elected politician to have the audacity to say something like this in the United States in 21st century. It means that she simply feels power, because there's 35% of vote in Chicago is black, and blacks vote only for their own self-interest.
Alexander, do you see the fundamental problem with this, what's going on with the case you just mentioned, is that these people who, the mayor of Chicago, Lightfoot, they think not in terms of individuals. They think about everything in terms of groups. In this case, in terms of racial groups, you know, either my group,
politicians always think in terms of groups.
Which is not
They
good.
never think about in terms of individuals.
See, that's what's wrong with politicians. That's what's wrong with politicians.
But we have no choice. We have to have politicians, you know. Actually, I do appreciate the service that they perform, because I would not be able to be a politician.
But we should not allow them to grow these big fangs, which they use to bite us, you know. Yeah, I understand it's unavoidable evil. We have to have politicians, you know. They think in terms of groups. But if we allow them the free reign, they will put us in trouble, you know.
And how do we stop it? Because they see it growing and growing and growing. It's growing here. It's growing in Minneapolis. It's growing in Detroit. It's going everywhere. And
we have such powerful element in our hands, like the law, the rule of law. We still, fortunately, I don't know for how long, but we still have the rule of law in the United States. We can use this against this
there's a rule of law, you know, and law can change too. It depends. Maybe there's going to be another state or two added to the United States, and the composition of Supreme Court will be changed. And also the whites can go the other way and also do the same Jim Crow laws or whatever it is, like blacks are doing now. This is horrible. And this is
look, Alexander, we have a lot of again, I hate to say this word, good people. We have a lot of reasonable people among different ethnic groups. For example, if you go to Indian community in the United States, Asian community, you will see intellectuals who fight against this trend to racialize our politics. If you go to African American community, you see such people like Thomas Sowell, who you heard this name, Thomas Sowell.
Yes, I do. But I just want to point to you that 92% of American black women support the race-based approach to politics. And 84% of black men support race-based approach to politics. And they compose and they make a big block within Democratic Party. And also, let's not forget that 30% of whites today do not want to be religious at all, other than in political sense. And they all go to, and this is the foundation of the Democratic Party today. Right now, there's a sort of balance. We do not know which way it's going to go. But for me, the problem is that this United States, you know, I believe that any country that has word united or federation or union or whatever it is, you know, points not only to its strength, it points to its Achilles heel, like Soviet Union. It shows everybody, it's not only that we are United States, but the union of the states is also our Achilles heel. It's our weak spot that we can collapse and I already see whites calling, you know, for separate states, and I see blacks calling for separate states. And what is it? What is going to happen to this?
Look, Alexander, we have such powerful thing as American federalism. We have Florida, we have Texas, we have New York, we have California, that are politically, ideologically, they're so different, like different countries. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And if we go this way, we need to save, preserve, and nourish our federalism. And federalism can cancel racial policies. That's the way to go.
I understand.
You know what I mean?
Yes, I understand. I'm not against federalism, but what I'm saying is that what is happening right now, from Illinois, hundreds of thousands of people are moving south to Florida and other places. Mm-hmm. And from California, they're moving to Texas and Florida and God knows what. And there's a process of separation between Democrats and Republicans by states, between whites and blacks, you know, by states, by cities, by suburbs, whatever it is. It's already there. But my question is this, and I understand that there's federalism and everything else. I'm asking a question. This socialism that you call cultural socialism, I'm afraid it may lead to another civil war, because the separation, you know, people leaving New York, people leaving Illinois, people leaving this, can lead to creation of white states and black states and this and this. This is horrible.
I don't think, I know what the picture, this doomsday picture you
Right.
are painting, you know, it's really scary. But at the same time, look, who are these people who participate in this so-called activism? It's like from 2 to 3%. They are very powerful. They are very noisy. Their voices are amplified by media. And to some extent, we're prisoners of media. But people on the ground, fortunately or unfortunately, their power is that they want to live a normal life. Sometimes they are not allowed to live a normal life, you know. But at the same time, see, it's hard to generalize. So we try to predict the future. I'm not a prophet. You are not a prophet, you know. So what we are trying today, we're trying to identify the problem and to show at least some kind of possible ways out of this conundrum. So in my book, I'm going back to my book, I tried to show, for example, why socialist ideas became popular. When I say popular, it doesn't mean that everybody embraces them. But Socialist Party in the United States, their number was 5,000 people before the economic crisis, 2007. Right now, it's 35,000 people. Is it the majority of population? Is it majority of the left? No, even on the left, this is a minority, okay? Or some people, identitarians, who's Antifa, or people who support BLM. It's still a minority, okay?
So you do not see the current events that are happening in the United States.
Oh, I see everything. But at the same time, I see the fight. On the other hand, there are some countering forces, you know, on the other side, okay? The forces, and it's not, see, what the people don't notice, that not people in mainstream media try to force us to think in racial terms. But fortunately, on the ground, that's not how this works, you know. People actually frequently vote more and more according to their purses, according to their class, according to the individual preferences, you know. How are you going to pigeonhole me as a Russian who came to the United States, who had nothing to do with this American Civil War, with whatever was going here in 1960s. And then people like me, they're probably like 50% here, maybe less, maybe
But the
more.
very fact that you identify with the United States and with the history of this country,
yeah,
makes
and I
you a
identify
part of
with
white supremacy. That's according to those people.
See, the problem is that we have to identify what brings us together as individuals. It's a fight, you know, because there's no guarantee for us that there's a certain outcome.
Oh, you're a follower of Martin Luther King, huh?
There's a political struggle.
Okay.
Opposing
Because
forces
those
fight.
people now that call themselves blacks, and I want to see, you know, why they call themselves blacks and what it means. They're against Martin Luther King.
That's a dangerous trend. See, that's a very dangerous trend. So I call it a slippery slope. That's what people, even people on the left, they said, we stepped on a dangerous ground, and I don't know how we're going to get out of this. But I told you, I'm an optimist, and I believe that even within the left, there is a debate. For example, there was a big debate about the project of 1619 between traditional left, Marxian left, and cultural left. Okay, Marx and left argued, look, American Revolution, it was something, it was a bourgeois revolution, it was good, it opened the doors to something good in future, you know, to socialism. But people on the cultural left, they say, oh, it was horrible because everything about American Revolution, it was racist, because they view American Revolution from a present viewpoint. They to make a long story short, in my book, I explain why suddenly, I'm going back to my book, why suddenly socialism became so popular. Okay. And I see two reasons why after 2007, socialism became so popular. First, economic crisis. See, no matter how much we talk about race, identity, everything goes back to money. If you have money, you do politics. If particular groups do not have funds to promote the politics, they don't do politics, okay? So how people felt uncomfortable? There was a crisis, a big crisis, okay? When the big banks in the United States were saved by the state, by George Bush, Obama, okay? And after 2007, we have socialists come into the picture and say, hey, there was a big crisis of capitalism, okay? So let's fight. So traditional leftists try to get up. And then we have cultural Marxists also come into the picture. And that's how these two friends, they became popular. And that's now they argue with each other. Who is going to lead the mainstream? Okay.
But it seems like their views in many ways come together. Because, for example,
sometimes they come together, sometimes not, because look, the culture left try to shame traditional leftists. They also say, oh, you're racist. You don't want to recognize the significance of race. You are reactionaries, but in the meantime, the traditional left said, oh, you betrayed the cause of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. You are the traitors. See, they call each other names, it's a favorite game of the leftists. Like in the last century, when the left didn't like something, they called everybody fascist. Remember, Stalin called social democrats, it's a reformed left, social fascist. I hate you because you don't believe in violent revolution. That's what Stalin told social democrats. You are social fascists. And social democrats also told Stalin, oh, it's the Bolshevism, it's a fascism. See, they hated each other. See, right now, people on the cultural left, everything is racism for them. See, the word racism even lost its meaning, because everything is racism. What you don't like in old times when you didn't like something, you call it fascism. Right now, if you don't like something, you call it racism. So I predict, again, I'm not a prophet, that soon in 10, 30 years, the word itself will lose completely its meaning. It's that's how it happens. Yeah.
The word will lose meaning, but as far as you're concerned, America will stay together and will continue to be free society.
It's up to us. It's up to people.
Country, yeah?
It's up to people. Again, I'm not a prophet. That's the horror. That's the horror and beauty of history, that we cannot predict the future. People cannot predict the future, and that is why they come up with science, with the laws of history, like Marx and Engels said. There's a bright future. People on the left, they say, oh, everything, no matter how hard it is, everything moves toward the bright future, socialism. Or I don't want to offend people who believe in God. That's how the idea of God came to visit the minds of the people, because people are horrified. They want to see what's going on to happen. That is why they say, oh, God, help me. I believe in God. Of course, let's pray together. Let's stand on our knees. God, save us. God will help us. At the same time, people on the left said, we're going to march for freedom, social justice. The laws of history will save us, because all roads lead to the bright future socialist utopia. Okay, we will build our bright new world, where everybody will be free.
And if you don't join us,
yeah,
you miss your chance to follow the footsteps of history.
Yeah, exactly.
Andrei, I want
to... People, again, the conclusion, again, the small conclusion we might make, people should be more humble. As long as you feel humble, respect opinion of your neighbor, don't try to cancel your neighbor, no matter where you are, on the left, on the right, we will preserve our society,
Well, hopefully people will listen to you, Professor Andrei Znamenski, and then everything is going to be okay. We're going to be humble. I do not know if I can be humble, but
in a good sense of the word, you know. You-
Yeah, but maybe some other people can be humble. I hope that they will become humble and will save us all, you know, from the horrible thing that that I do not want to see happen.
And don't believe media, you know, don't believe media. Compare, read as much information as possible from alternative sources. Read everything. News on the left, on the right, compare, and don't believe anybody. Even my opinion is my personal opinion. Don't open your mind to the prophets, because we have, especially in time of crisis, we have so many prophets around us, you know. Don't follow the prophets. Be your own prophet.
Be your own prophet. Okay, so that is good. I'm going to try to be my own prophet. We'll see how it works out. But in any case, I want to thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much
for this very interesting conversation. And once again, you know, your book can be purchased on Amazon, and the link is right there below this video. And if you like this conversation, please subscribe, and we'll have more good people visiting Chicago Jewish Cafe. The very best.
Thank you. Thank you. I wish you the best of luck. Thank you.